Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our second day of the Nasher Prize Graduate Symposium, dedicated to the work of the 2022 Nasher Prize Laureate, Nairy Baghramian. I'm Catherine Kraft, curator at the Nasher Sculpture Center, and I'll be moderating today's events. We have two speakers today, and we'll be responding to questions at the end after the second talk. I'd invite and encourage all of you to please submit questions for our speakers through the chat function. Our first speaker is India Picton from Central St. Martin's, Granary Square, London. The title of her paper is Nairy Baghramian, Becoming Misfits. Take it away, India.
Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone at the Nasher for organising this week. So yes, my paper is called Becoming Misfits. Childhood is seen as the start of the unidirectional path to who we are today. Minor or major events seem to decide our likes, dislikes, desires, and abilities. But our understanding of what it means to be, as a subject, is constantly undone and rewritten. Misfits was a show by Nairy Baghramian last year, which began in Milan in June. Misfits later moved to Paris, switching up the curation to reflect the new time and space. I'll be focusing on the Misfits of the Milan show, exploring her review and activation of childhood as a signifier. I'm interested in the ways Misfits absorbs and disrupt Deleuze and Guattari's theory of becoming, in particular that of the becoming child. What larger issues are addressed by questioning growing up, play, and education? I will introduce the show briefly and follow through into the becoming child, then into the becoming ambivalent, and finish with our destination of the becoming misfit. These explorations will demonstrate the ways Nairy's work elucidates and clarifies theories of becoming, and how the misfit acts symbolically as a notion of resistance. The show was held at the Galleria d'Arte Moderna in Milan, housed within the neoclassical Villa Reale. The villa once belonged to Napoleon, with Anna Vukadin noting the distractions of the chandeliers, elaborate stuccos, and mosaics. For Vukadin, the sculptures of misfits both fit in and jar with the opulent setting. For Nairy, the space held a particular set of questions in her investigation because of its exclusively under 12s, 12-year-olds, and accompanying adult garden. Vukadin calls this something of a tease. Misfits was spread across 5 ground floor rooms, which featured floor-to-ceiling windows. These windows open onto the exclusive terrace, featuring a secluded garden with a pond and small playground. This area remains inaccessible to a majority of visitors. The under-12s therefore become part of a certain performance for the visitors restricted from this area, becoming characters in the theatre of Misfits. Each indoor room featured half of a sculpture, whose pairing puzzle piece was only accessible via the terrace. The highly charged material of marble was exclusively used in the outside, amplifying the reduced scale of their interior counterparts. Nairy's division of each piece generated a quest to connect the sculptures, each labelled Misfit A, B, C, and so on. This is Misfit Y that we can see in the picture. The Misfit is implied as divided, incomplete, and yet coexistent between the divided realm of the adult and child. The adult realm is able to glimpse at that of the child, but their experience remains accessible only at a visual level. For the interior half, the sculptures were produced mainly in painted cast aluminium or aluminum and were paired in conversation with Nairy's photographic series, Jumbled Alphabet. Throughout the exhibition, visitors were greeted with the series. The muddied and slumping face of the young child assumes the position of grumpy brat. Riddled with backcombed hair and determined unhappiness, the image represents the traditional museum-goer's worst nightmare of the screaming child at the exhibition. The series resembles that of a collection of learning cards we may find in school or nursery, where we were taught how humans express sadness, happiness, anger, and joy. The playground of sculpture which Nairy produced is supported by these photographs in her questioning of the learning structures currently in place for children. Here we can take our mere glimpses at that child's experience within the show. The variations in our world between goes far beyond our respective subjectivities because of the child's innate ability to play off what is there. Our ability to reflect on their freedom to experience the world is created through our viewing of the playground in an exhibition environment, with the chance and framework to ponder on its philosophical premise. Perhaps these children are living through the triumph of death, or have taken their final hit during battle. They could be being celebrated as a ruler, or have been left out to dry on the banks of the Thames. Or maybe they're just taking a pause in the hot summer Milan air to catch their breath. We're asked to involve ourselves in the drama of these worlds, rather than write them off as misfits. To look into the interaction of our performers within the show is, I believe, a necessary part of understanding its impact. For seeing the distance between play and the provided buttresses of Nairy's playground demands a reflection on the relationship between the two. What is implied in the way we teach? What do we enforce as natural conditions via the playground? And where can we find movement and freedom at the Misfits' questioning of our standards in society? So my mum designed playgrounds when I was younger, and this is actually one of hers, although she told me she preferred to use the term outdoor learning environments recently. In British schools, there was a mass installation during my childhood of what we called trim trails, these wooden playground installations which required us to jump, hop, swing and climb round in endless circles during playtime. The playground of today has various forms around the world, but a key conversation point in their evolution is their intensity in determining the form of play available. A history of the theory of play and games have evolved most notably in recent history alongside the development of plastic in the commodity form and the activation of toys from wooden cars, china dolls, and balls to plastic play pieces with lights, cameras, and blaring noises. Through Freudian psychoanalysis and feminist theories, we learned the way play reflects and determines our growth into adults. Alternative schools of thinking in regards to play were born perpendicularly to a reflection on the way commodity toys of the late 20th and early 21st century appear to overstimulate and reduce creativity within the child, such as the various self-directed learning techniques such as a Montessori education. Misfits, however, whilst pointing to the abilities of the child to create with very little, is not fair justice to what Baghramian evokes through the exhibition. Through our intervention into the logic of the building block itself, Baghramian asks us to reflect on our experience and expectations of finality in learning and growth. Deleuze and Guattari put forward a theory of becoming which turns the emphasis away from a completed being and towards a continual process of movement and change. A fixed traditional understanding of being positions childhood as merely pre-adulthood. In their work, 1,000 Plateaus, becoming is loosely described as starting from the form one has, the subject one is, the organs one has, or the functions one fulfills. Becoming is to extract particles between which one establishes the relations of movement and rest, speed and slowness that are closest to what one is becoming and through which one becomes. We're therefore becoming X as opposed to being X. We are constantly becoming A, becoming B, and becoming C, or becoming child, becoming woman, becoming misfit, which makes outlining ourselves as being India impossible, limiting, and stuck in time. Deleuze and Guattari outline that childhood is part of a majoritarian relation with adulthood, where childhood is considered the minoritarian. Other examples of majoritarian relations are male-female, white-black, human-animal, all relations in society which are formed on a power imbalance. These categories of race, gender, age, etc. are described as the molar categories of the world by Deleuze and Guattari. Jane Newland describes that becomings break out of the molarity of growing up. It breaks down the preconceived binaries that arrange us between man, woman, and adult child. Nairy's building blocks, in many ways, function metaphorically for Deleuze and Guattari's blocks of becoming, which make up childhood. When Nairy points out the methodology of Deleuze and Guattari as one which works through terminology and explores its expansiveness. Both Deleuze and Baghramian's blocks contain potential for evolving ourselves. Picton explains that Baghramian's blocks and their teasing of unity reveal our expectations of such unity, and how this in many ways began through our learning tools and their implications of fitting in. Through Misfits, a potential is realized in the failure of the blocks. And I just wanted to share this video of the children actually interacting with the show, so we can see the playground in its intended use. The process of becoming for Deleuze and Guattari, whilst we become other is ultimately altered in the process too. By observing the children within the playground, we are opening up the process of becoming child. Becoming child frees both us and affects the expectations of the child, alleviating the existence of the misfit. They state, as someone becomes, what he is becoming changes as much as he does himself. Becoming are not phenomena of imitation or assimilation, but of a double capture. We are not playing childishly or impersonating the misfit, but exploring systematically how we understand what we expect, preconceive, and affect the other that is the child. Whether becoming is achieved in each visitor will be determined by the individual's desire to complete the becoming. Yet, as Deleuze states, singing, painting, art, music, all have no other aim than to unleash these becomings. Ultimately, what is real for Deleuze and Guattari is these becomings, or block of becomings, rather than the molar categories which becoming passes through. Our current conception of childhood is more than ever imbued with futurity. Whilst childhood as signifier is a very large topic of debate, through from Philip Airy's invention of childhood as the pinhead of understanding the child as a completely unnatural fact, to the response of Linda Pollock, who demonstrated a longevity of the concept beyond Airy's so-called invention timeline. It is difficult to deny now the understanding of the child as the pre-adult, as we're asked where we see ourselves in 5, 10, and 15 years' time from the mere age of 8 and upwards. David Kennedy points out the oft-repeated American slogan of mainstream educators and politicians of, "Children are our greatest natural resource," most famously used by Herbert Hoover. Children, for Kennedy, act as human resources, merely raw material for the production, through schooling, of the late capitalist worker, citizen, consumer. Nairy reminds us that to become child, it must be beyond such signification and on a molecular level. Her sculptures also refuse a strict signification. For if we become child, fixed in the understanding of child as a human resource, we reaffirm the minoritarian position of the child to the adult. It is therefore important that the work is communicated through the medium of the playground to understand the child through their movements, actions, and behaviors. Becoming pre-adult, then, is the rationalization of a stage theory, as childhood is over before it begins. Potentially, then, if we embrace becoming, we would probably have to remove the 12-year-old limit of the gallery's garden, but Nairy reminds us that we're not quite there yet. Throughout the COVID pandemic, we have been forced to reevaluate the ways we teach our children. A mass movement to homeschooling called into question the relationship between teaching and learning. 2021 was a time when not only Nairy, but the world was looking for alternate ways to teach children and learn themselves. A separation, but also new closeness between the worlds of the adult and child, a reunited home, difficulties of online learning platforms, all these undoubtedly altered the ability to practice becoming child. Worries about what we missed at each stage of the education system revealed deep rifts in the debate surrounding the concept of growth. Ultimately, we have been forced to evaluate how we understand the stage theory of growing up. In many ways, COVID has opened up lines of flight for the becoming child and opened us up to the ways children become outside of school and outside of linear formulaic patterns of growth. Nairy's self-described ambivalent abstraction demonstrates an ambition towards materialization of indiscernibility, which reflects a shared aim with the program of becoming. To become, again, is not to identify or imitate, but to find the zone of proximity, indifferentiation, where one can no longer be distinguished from a woman, an animal, or a molecule. The misfits of the exhibition remain indetermined. The stretched and imprinted entities throughout the Villa Real are pure form. Often bouncing the colours of the room around themselves, they push their relationship with the walls and ask us to rethink what truly separates them. Toying between these natural and manipulated mediums, Nairy asks us to question what appears as natural in an environment and what sticks out. Fukunin feeds back that her soft-edged sculptures conjured up some lingering memory of characters populating our childhood. As we teetered between recognition and confusion as to what they might be, our arguably socialized preference to locate determination in shape reflects a much larger debate on our instinctual hunter-gatherer drives towards safety and protection. Nevertheless, we can address here the power ambivalent abstraction holds in a discussion on learning. For the child's existence, we can celebrate in its true aptitude at embracing ambivalence. They are, after all, the undetermined and pre-socialized existence of ourselves. We both celebrate and envy the child for their freedom of restriction. Once we enter into society, we then begin to form ourselves and recognize ourselves as individual subjects, what we once believed was a necessity of survival. But becoming works against the need to ground ourselves in such subjecthood. In 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari outline that the cosmic formula of becoming is to move towards the becoming imperceptible. Newland explains this as such. To interact with a physical object, it is first perceived by the senses. It is the perceived object which is interpreted and categorized. Its limits, doubtless, are the thresholds of perception are relative. There is always a threshold capable of grasping what eludes another. This is to understand the entanglement of our senses. To appreciate the smell fully is to limit the power of the taste. To glimpse at the human foot is to forget its connection to the leg. Colebrook expands his limitation as such through the plant form. It is not a static thing, although we perceive it as such. The plant is the reception of light, heat, moisture, insect pollination, and so on. It is a process of becoming in relation to other becoming. Therefore, Newland explains that becoming removes our reliance in analysis of human perception altogether. It points to the existence of an other which both precedes and surpasses perception. She continues, becoming imperceptible undoes identities and requires us to leave behind not only the perceptible boundaries of the body, but also the one's conventional understanding of oneself, of others, and of one's world, in order to respond to the informing impact of imperceptible encounters. The abstract forms of Misfits engenders this engagement with ambivalence, in-betweenness, and indetermination. Whilst the opulence of marble is incorporated into the adult's experience, this is a signifier much weaker in the child's mind. To look even through mere scale asks us to register with the ways a child sees a world which is most often not designed for them. It is the playground and classroom alone which is fitted to the child's size. We can practice our becoming child through proximity, yet Nairy chooses to restrict our access. Perhaps then, Misfits asks us to explore the division of interior and exterior through our ability to connect with each other beyond proximity, another problem which has arisen through the pandemic. How would Deleuze suggest we become other through a virtual screen? The image of the scruffy child resembles the androgyny of the pure child as existing beyond the expectations of their soon-to-be enforced gender, before a young girl must comb her hair 100 times a day. Cecil Lindsay describes this predetermined stage of the human as before the forces of education install the second nature of language, culture, and socialization. What Lyotard refers to as the complexification of ourselves is the process of absorbing and resisting the world around us. Nairy asks us to locate this persistent openness to becoming beyond what we know. Whilst arguably the term abstraction implies a derivative form, abstracted from, that is, viewing these sculptures as existing in their own right is key to our ability to enact becoming. Ambivalence need not derive from, but incorporate a possibility in a reality beyond our current one. The figure of the misfit therefore allows us to think through our perceived limitations of knowledge and selfhood. By aligning with the logic of becoming, we move towards the ability to live tolerantly rather than in egoic conflict. Kennedy describes that what is created is a trajectory of escape from the subject identified by the molar categories of class, gender, race, ethnicity, law, custom, and subjectivity itself, as located in historical practice. Kennedy points out that we look to the child as a source of investigation into the relations between good and evil, reason and irrationality, and innocence and experience. He states, every age has had its iconic child that both exemplifies and problematizes its psychocultural ideology. There was the Eros of the ancient world, the original sinner infant of Augustinian Christianity, the divine child in the Renaissance, the white paper child of the Neo-Enlightenment, the natural child of Romanticism, the angelic victim child of the Victorians, the bundle of drives of the behaviorists, and the neotenic child of the progressives. Each point to an origin and a goal, each a specific kind of problem to be solved as a major preoccupation of the age, thus signifying futurity. Each layer of iconic history is incorporated into today's signification of child. This fluidity of the icon demonstrates the necessity to extend becoming beyond our current child, to experience the child within Nary's playground as constantly becoming other entities. In the same way, the ambivalent sculptures teeter between different forms which are recognized within the mind. I also just wanted to include this other amazing photo I found of the progressive time, where these children are playing in this playground made from things in the dump. And this era really pointed to one of the earliest stages of children being considered as the future workforce. Ohad Zahavi argues for the emancipation of children to be treated as class war as such. Inspired by the dialectics of sex by Shulamith Firestone, Ohad draws on Shulamith's insistence that becoming woman and becoming child is a joint political program. Much like what Baghramian points to with Misfits, Zahavi described how children are expected to be much more subdued, disciplined, and domesticated creatures than what young people can and should be. Deleuze and Guattari explain the division of the sexes as part of this de-animalizing process. The body is stolen first from the girl. Stop behaving like that. You're not a little girl anymore. You're not a tomboy, etc. The girl's becoming is stolen first in order to impose a history or prehistory upon her. The boy's turn comes next, but it is by using the girl as an example, by pointing to the girl as the object of his desire, then opposed organism, that a dominant history is fabricated for him too. Judith Butler reaffirms, this is not the product of a choice, but the forcible citation of a norm, whose complex historicity is indissociable from relations of discipline, regulation, and punishment. Newland raises that the story of Peter Rabbit sums up a central dilemma of childhood, whether one should act naturally in accordance with one's basic animal instincts, or do as one's parents wish and learn how to act in obedience to their more civilized codes of behavior. Therefore, to become child is not to become not adult. It's almost the opposite. It's not, as Zahavi points out, regressing to a childlike state, but to shed of your contrived adult skin, so that the child can do away with its fabricated child skin. Nary's non-conformant playground, Vukadin describes, could seem outdated and heavy-handed in message, derivative of the lauded methods of Montessori. Yet, understood through becoming, the show insists of the adult reassessing their relationship to the world of the child. The playground is not quite a performance work, yet does require participants to achieve its full potential. Again, 2021 was a key year for readdressing how teaching children is done. Black Lives Matter protests of the summer pointed to a stagnation in our ability to empathize, and with this violence, which is resultant of the struggle to live outside egoic identity. In the same year, thinking for yourselves was manipulated from understanding the systemic violence of police outside of normative teaching methods to don't believe the existence of a pandemic and the necessity to alter your way of living. Our world is reckoning with the groundlessness of belief at an extreme level, and Baghramian's Misfits pick us up on the symbol of the child as a possibility for the release from such systems. The harmonious fitting together of blocks does little to represent the future beyond childhood. Becoming child opens up a line of flight for humanity, allowing us to move away from socially imposed subjectivity. For Deleuze, Alice in Wonderland epitomizes true becoming, as she grows up, down, forwards, and backwards, each movement depending on the cake eaten or the side of the mushroom chosen to chew on. All these changes lead Alice to question her subjectivity, and, as Dorothea Olkowski points out, past is no longer carrying on into the present, as she desperately attempts to recite her timetables with no luck. Moreover, the stretching and suggestible forms of Nary's sculpture simulate a new mode of understanding materiality. The reflecting on the subjectivity of signification, The Misfits of Milan deny linguistic parameters for their description. Nairy's work reveals for me an alternative method of empathy to others by opening up a process of becoming which traverses both time and space. Like Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, Nairy asks us to question what we both gain and lose through growing up. Through the split method of the exhibition, we can experience the overlaps of the becoming child within ourselves as adults. The significance of Nairy's sculptures being unable to fit together reveals the impossibility of a straight path from childhood to adulthood and demonstrates our natural state of becoming, insofar as our inability to be final or complete beings. To become is therefore simultaneously to resist and maintain proximity to your state of becoming. And that's it. Thanks for watching.
India, thank you for that fascinating paper, which gives us so much to think about. And for those of you watching, please go ahead and submit questions for India in the chat, and we'll be addressing them after our next presentation. Our second speaker is Camilla Mattola from the University of Sassari in Italy, and the title of her paper is Sculpture, Bodies, and Social Conflict, Nairy Baghramian, Between Institutional Critique and Activism. Thank you, Camilla.
Yes. Thank you, Catherine, for the introduction. I want to thank the Nasher for this event, and I'm really happy to be here. Then I'll start. The social impact of art and museum practices has become so important to let the critics to speak about a social turn of the arts. In her article, The Social Turn, Collaboration Meets Discontent, Claire Bishop states, in fact, that the political task of art has become a priority against the apparent aimless aesthetic. She divides contemporary artists into two opposite sides: aesthetes that believe in the autonomy of art, and activists that refuse it as a symbol of dominant and exclusive narratives. Describing believers and non-believers in social art, she writes, the former, at their most extreme, will condemn us to a world of irrelevant painting and sculpture, while the latter have a tendency to self-marginalize to the point of inadvertently reinforcing art's autonomy. Is there a ground on which the two sides can meet? While Bishop answers this question by examining some examples of relational art, I found it interesting how sculpture, which is normally excluded from the critical inquiries about artistic practices and social content, can interpret the topic. I think that with their abstract sculptures depicting tense and conflicted bodies and their strategies of collaboration and display, Nairy Baghramian demonstrates how artistic practices are related to activism, can carry political content without directly addressing it, ultimately conceiving socially engaged art as a multi-level conceptual and aesthetic experience. This paper aims to explore Baghramian's take on the demos of body cultures as a complex phenomenon embedded in modern society, which also defines the relationship between individuals and space and collective narratives, as an inclusive artistic and curatorial practice and a potential tool to remediate history. By examining some Baghramian's work as beliebte Stallen, co-shoulder, state honors, and the curatorial project of the Formation Professionnelle, a work desk from Ambassador's Wife, I will discuss the artist's aesthetic and conceptual point of view through the lens of artistic and social studies, of artistic theories and social studies. Social sciences see the body as a complex sociocultural and historical phenomenon, a symbol and an agent of social meanings and practices. Both traditional and digital tribes, as scholars define contemporary Western societies and their codependency on the media, conceive subjectivity and community as strictly related to body culture. With its arbitrary constructions as gender, ethnicity, shape, care, and fashion, the body can either be used to discriminate individuals or to fight social exclusion. In the last decades, artists have symbolically and physically used it to make political statements through the media of performance, installation, video, photography, and the immediacy of figurative painting. On the opposite, Baghramian sculptures seem to move in the liminal zone between figuration and abstraction. The social content of their artistic discourse is embedded in a post-minimalistic study of shapes, materials, and space in the line of research opened by the late 60s eccentric abstraction. In her work, the body is semantically and figuratively analyzed in both its absence and its presence. It is implicitly evoked through images of fashion and orthopedic devices, or more explicitly depicted by sculptures that recall body parts, organs, or bones. Her works include some metal structures with inserts of rubber and resin, whose slender shape and broken lines remind of dental braces and corsets embracing invisible bodies. Looking at the material coldness and unnatural proportions, it is easy to perceive them as means of containment and physical correction. The sculptures that refer to the body in its presence are usually made with the same materials, but covered in softly levigated layers of epoxy resin. Whether they represent bodies or tools of restraint, these artworks share the same fragmented features and relation with the space. They usually inhabit transitional locations as corridors, ceilings, and secondary entrances. Their presence in transitional spaces recalls Buren's invasive installations. They manifest a general sense of fracture. It is embedded in the very structure, designed to be modular and easy to move in different compositions and locations. The sculpture's intention, located in liminal spaces and restrained by invisible forces, are decoded through a semi-abstracted language. Even so, they suggest the idea of individuals and bodies constricted by social pressures. An excellent example of this tension is the Beliebte Stahlen series. They are sculptures of various sizes in the shape of a broken circle, made of metal and resin of different colors, resembling unnaturally curved bones. Their texture made them look frozen in a semi-liquid state. They usually interact with the space in a decorative and challenging way. They occupy unusual locations as walls, commonly used to display bidimensional artworks. For the installation at the Erben Dronstenhof in Münster in 2017, Baghramian designed a fragmented version of the series. Called privilege points, it consists of a pile of organic forms, more giant than usual, cut in pieces and painted in white. The metallic flat intern is exposed and painted in gold. The installation was placed in the backyard of the exhibition building, opposed to another sculpture installed at the front. It is a piece of the same series, similar sized, but painted in blue, intact and with extremities of a phallic shape. While commenting on the differences between these two versions of the sculptures, Andrew Rothman observed that their different shapes, colors, and locations may allude to gender inequalities. While the blue and intact piece installed at the front of the building alludes to men and their privileges in assisting culture and public life, the fractured sculpture in the backyard can be seen as symbolizing women and their oppression. Some scholars define women's history as an account of fragmented bodies and identities. In Western societies, the female body has undergone the most violent and deep objectifying process in culture and history. The result is the metaphorical fragmentation of women's body parts, social role, and identity under the male gaze. As a result of cultural constructions referring to arbitrary ideals of beauty, wellness, and status, body image can degenerate into social stigmas. Individuals are discriminated against according to their physical appearance, to the point of influencing the way they perceive public and private space. This is particularly true now, considering the overexposure of private and public life through social media. In artworks such as Cold Shoulder, first displayed in 2014 at the Fondação Serralbersi in Porto, Baghramian seems to address these issues. They are massive sculptures made of iron and pink and magenta epoxy resin. They are site-specifically designed to reflect chromatic and structural hints of the institutional frame. Their shape resembles the shoulder pads used in the 80s. In Western discriminating narratives, body beauty usually involves being white and slender. There are also gender variation, from men being tall and muscular to women having sorted hair and spotless skin. Besides specific cases, body standards ultimately prove to be tools of social oppression. This fact is also demonstrated by the cultural and political debates around body care and politics, which often condemn body rights, such as abortion, sexual consensus, and euthanasia. As a result, people perceive public and private spaces as over-demanding and judgmental of their moral conduct and personal appearance. These dimensions are commonly fantasized as coincident. Women, for example, are expected to look good to be competitive, whatever it may mean. This is also the case of the oversized shoulder pads of the 80s, whose purpose was to make women look masculine to be taken seriously. The allusion to restless body is explicit in the sculpture ensemble State Honors. It is the answer to another sculptural project depicting a class reunion through surrealistically inspired slender metallic forms. State Honors represent the excluded and bullied members of their class. The piece has peculiar titles such as Ugly Duckling and Nerd. In contrast to their precedents, these sculptures, made of metal and silicone, painted in different pastel colors, appear corpulent and clumsy, with a soft texture resembling skin. They give the general impression of bodies on the edge of collapsing on themselves. The precariousness of their pose is emphasized by their attempt to find support to sustain their weight. Some of them are literally leaning on one another. The tense and fragmented nature of Baghramian sculptures epitomizes how individuals react to social constructions and public spaces. These corporeal subjects seem, in fact, to barely survive under the pressure of their group and institutional frame. But ultimately, they do, inhabiting physical and ideal in-between space and finding balance and beauty in precariousness, as people resist oppressive narratives by accepting differences and building positive counter-narratives. Getting back to the Beliebte Stalin series, a few months after the inauguration at Münster, the bony structures were assembled again for the Formation Professionnelle. The exhibition was hosted by the SMAC of Ghent at the Work Arts Center of Minneapolis and displayed a new corpus of art based on photographic projects, sculptures, and installations made by the artists in the last 2 decades. In a previous lecture held in 2012 at the Verallis Center for Art and Politics, the Sculpture Center in New York, Baghramian argued the need for artists to discuss their work more in depth. Artists, she said, need to participate in artistic debates to prevent the subject-object identification effect. If left conceptually unexplained, the artwork appears to the audience as an autonomous being. It can only speak for itself or through curatorial interpretation. She also pointed out the dispersive effect of mega exhibitions as promoters of a standardized experience. This format, in fact, chooses sensationalism over discursivity. Baghramian's lecture was a call to action for artists who should risk controversy and stake contentious claims while contextualizing their work. But most of all, it gives attention to the importance of participating narratives in institutional space. In the curatorial project of the Formation Professionnelle, which hosted, as we said, some pieces of the Beliebte Stalin series, Baghramian discussed her career together with the hosted institutions. They created a collective narratives that they consider her work not as a static, linear phenomenon divided into defined phases as a traditional retrospective would do, but as a continuously evolving picture. She dismantled a sculpture made of metals, resin, plastics, and fabrics to recompose them according to new ideas and architectural spaces. She wasn't acting in the logic of a tabula rasa, but adding and taking out material, reflecting on shapes and texture, full and empty spaces. She then substituted the original objects with formal and conceptual counterpart. Fragmentation and recursiveness here are the vehicles of a process of mutual self-reflection. It enables the artist to present their vision of her career, a task that usually compelled curators, and the institution to reflect on its traditional exhibition practices. The importance of collective narratives and the topics of gender inequalities take us to another project, Work Desk for an Ambassador's Wife, held at Marian Goodman Gallery in New York in 2019. It featured Nairy Baghramian and Jeanette Lavrière. The exhibition represents a tribute to Jeanette Lavrière's work and an attempt to remediate history. Its title comes from the project Cabinet de Travail d'une Femme d'Ambassadeur, a winch desk designed by Lavrière in the 50s. It was meant for an ambassador's wife as a symbol of her work and emancipation, and it is a project representative of Lavrière's art and political beliefs. Born in Swiss, Lavrière worked in France as an interior designer in the aftermath of the Second World War in a patriarchal and exclusionist artistic environment. During the war, she joined the resistance and later took part in the Front National des Décorateurs, a collective of designers bounded by democratic ideals. Initially, Lavrière's style was influenced by the formalism of the Bauhaus and Deco's geometric decorativeness. Her style had a special tone in the 80s when she began to explore the concept of uselessness. She produced a series of furniture of no practical use, inspired by her political beliefs, often expressed with written quotes, titles, and symbolic references to feminism and socialism. As for many other women artists, her work has been overlooked by mainstream art and design history. Her furniture series, Evocations, consist of mirrors in wooden frames and metallic fabrics, painted and designed in a surrealistic and eccentric mood, with written references to activism. Due to various obstructions, such as paint or wooden and metallic inserts, the mirrors cannot reflect anything. Work Desk for an Ambassador's Wife included some of these mirrors, plus other pieces of Lavrière's furniture, such as bookshelves and lamps, and a series of Baghramian sketches raising metallic maquettes called side lips. Their purpose is to resonate with Lavrière's work by reflecting on formal and symbolical pattern and the idea of the unfinished. The sculpture Colonne Cassée sketch, for example, is Baghramian's answer to one of Lavrière's mirrors, La Commune, a tribute to Louise Michel, a female leader of La Commune de Paris. The mirror is shaped like a cherry, built in a wooden box, and painted in bright red and black, with the name of Michel and a quote from the Commune song written in a pop font on the side. The mirror can be closed with a metallic door pierced by ballyhoos, a symbol of rebellion and political fight. Colonne Cassée sketch is an installation made of aluminum, zinc, and plexiglass, divided into two sections. The first consists of two perpendicular metallic foils separated by a plexiglass panel. They mirror each other while descending to the floor, and their surface is pierced by bullet holes, a reference to Lavrière's artwork. Here the mirror and the metaphor of social conflict, the bullets, are explored as a continuous process that expands through history and the material. It is extended as a metallic stream in the two foils, signifying maybe that Michel and Lavrière followed the same path, sharing the fight for gender equality. The second section, connected to the first by the plexiglass panel, consists of an orange-painted T-shaped shelf, displaying some of Baghramian's drawings. They depict unrealized sculptures. The irregular and sinuous forms in the sketches recall some of the artist's organic sculptures, but with a more abstract accent. In Baghramian's artistic vision, no hierarchical aesthetic conversations based on mutual inspiration appear as ideal, inclusive counter-narratives. They can be seen also as institutional practices with the potential to remediate the past. Speaking of their interest in different artistic genres and the prevalence of abstraction in her artworks, Baghramian commented, it is difficult to assign more political potential to one medium or technique over another. This is also the case with abstraction, and I'm convinced that it has the potential to convey a political stance without being too explicit or even superficial. Addressing specifically the topic of the political task of art, its media and practices, she added, in every decade, there are only a few representative artists who have or who take on the task of cleaning up history, and at some point, they collapse under the burden. This burden should be borne by everyone equally. Otherwise, we will continue to maintain and establish colonial structures by creating more categories. History concerns us all and belongs to all of us. I was happy to be able to move between different genres and to establish relationships between different genres in order to create an ambivalence. With these words, Baghramian seems to suggest discursively and aesthetically how the next step in decolonizing the artistic discourse could be the normalization of political dams in non-performative practices, even through the language of abstraction, ultimately demonstrating that there is not a single genre that has the potential to be political. Even if not directly addressing activist dams, Baghramian's aesthetic reflection on social issues as gender inequalities and body culture ultimately embodies Sarah Masker's definition of symbolic action. Following the critical path of Jim Sharp's analysis of nonviolent protest, Mask defines symbolic action as an active political practice that does not rely exclusively on performance, but also on colors and symbols in which people can recognize a social cause. Thank you.
Camilla, thank you for that also wonderful contribution. And we do now have time for some questions for both you and India. And let me just take a look at the chat here. I would encourage folks watching, I know it's hard to put questions into the chat when you're absorbed in listening to the talks, but I'd invite you to go ahead and add some more. We do have one already for India. India, can you say more about the relationship of the space/gallery to the work and children? It is such an interesting contrast.
Yes, does it mean, sorry, in this work in particular?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it's an interesting place where, yeah, as I was saying with the jumbled alphabet, it's kind of traditionally, if you saw a child looking like that in a gallery, you might be thinking, you know, this isn't a space for them. And so to kind of open up a space in an exhibition environment for children, but also not, it's not like a kid's thing, like in the usual, let's say, of like if there's a gallery show, it's kind of bringing the adults to look at play in a whole different way. And I think having that already expectations of how to behave in a gallery space kind of as well, which kind of is highlighted by who the Misfits are. But at the same time, you automatically play into looking at what you're seeing and thinking about it in a different way. So I think that it, yeah, changes what play is and invites us to look at the way we connect with children and the way we are similar and different, I guess.
I think a sort of a variation or twist on that. One of the images that you showed of, I think, a Montessori space had a little plaque on the wall that said, play is the work of the child. And I think another way to maybe or to think about that question is also work in the sense of labor. That is, if the children that we see interacting with Nairy's sculptures, or if they're playing, does play have an end, that is, or is it a thing in itself? Is it work?
Yeah. And I think, especially for Deleuze and Guattari, a lot of their work is kind of working against Freud and psychoanalysis. And I think there's a certain cause and effect logic that is built into a psychoanalytic view of the child, which kind of does position, this event will make this happen in the child, and then that will be the adult they become. And I guess play even is part of that. And so play is never expansive or as free as maybe it could be. It's always going to be a reflection of how they're feeling in regards to their mother or a new baby or something. So I guess to think about play as work, it just kind of highlights how we see play, and how it's always seen as got to have an endpoint of building to a certain kind of adult, rather than being open to other possibilities, I guess.
Sorry, I'm just, we've got a couple of different questions. One thing that I think is, might be an interesting question for Camilla is, you talked, especially in talking about deformation professionnelle, this notion of returning to earlier works, the kind of remediation and recursiveness. And I wonder if you observed or you think in that kind of process of Nairy's, whether how is that connected to the political and social aspects of her practice? Does returning to motifs draw out different kinds of social aspects, or in what, or reinforce them, or what have you observed?
Yes, that's an interesting question. I don't think that all these aspects of her work have a primary or secondary plays a primary or secondary role in all in the picture. And I think that also this kind of attempt of reappropriation of her own work in the formation professionnelle is just connected to the way in which she sees the artistic production as a complex phenomenon that has many meanings that are always changing. The point of the reappropriation of their work in the formation professionnelle and the attempt to also express social content through her work, I think that all are connected by the idea of thinking outside the labels. And an aspect that is probably, we can probably apply to every single aspect of her work, starting from the aesthetic and the creative process, so the relationship with the materials, until the expression of all of these meanings, also these social meanings and political meanings. So I think it's a continuous process of both artistic and conceptual reappropriation of artworks and meanings.
Thank you for that. Let's see. A question for India. Well, actually, I think this could be for both of you. How do you think the arts or creative world can support the reminder of our interdependence and that our strength and human tenderness depends on collective action and living? It's a big question.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think for me, just in terms of what I was talking about today, I think the idea that we're constantly becoming other, and that once we try to engage in this process of becoming, and we're both changing ourselves and another at the same time, it kind of reminds us, you know, the way that we are because of others. And Inji said yesterday about the exhibition in the Marian Goodman Gallery, when you enter from behind and you're alerted of the way that your body is being determined by others at all times. And so I think especially with sculpture and Baghramian, that kind of reflection on the way that you're constantly being determined by others and determining others' actions. And I think it can remind us of agency that we have, and perhaps, yeah, just bring us into our own bodies in some ways and remind us of the interdependence, as the question says.
I agree with India, and in fact, one of the point, I think of the main point, is that of the collective narratives in particular, and a subject that has been part, it must be part of an artistic practice, also of a curatorial practice too. An artist necessarily has to confront to several different narration between artists and more artists, between the artist and the institutional frame, between the artist and the public. So yes, maybe investigating in a more deep way this kind of relation and collecting narratives, yes, we can also have some positive effects in our reality.
I think this is also something we will probably be returning to in our roundtable. And I think I see one more. Actually, I have two questions. One is I think a fairly short question. Somebody wondering, I think it's for India, but it would apply to both of you. Did you have an opportunity to see the exhibition in Milan, or have you had an opportunity to see other presentations, both of you, of Nairy's work in person?
I haven't, no. This was all completely via the computer. So yes, I guess it's limited in that way, but that's what I had available, yeah. But yeah, I was thinking about it yesterday when I was watching Inji's presentation again. So yeah, it's just an interesting thing to consider for sure.
Me neither, but I hope to see her next project.
Right, and as something I think that relates to that and draws back to Inji's presentation yesterday a little bit. One of the questions is, I love the point about dislocation of the body via isolating a body part. I wonder how you think this resonates with rising social viewpoints that split us further apart. I think that was a question for India, but it could be for it could be for Camilla as well. the role that dislocation or fragmentation of the isolation of body parts play in her work.
Sorry, you just what's the word, crackled up a bit at the end there. Do you mind repeating what the last bit of the question was? Sorry.
I'm sorry, did you lost part of what I was saying?
Yes, yeah, sorry.
Okay, yeah, no, that's all right. It was a question about the Nary's use you were speaking of the dislocation of the body via isolating a body part, and the questioner was asking about there being a possible connection with the divisiveness of certain rising social viewpoints, things that seem to split us socially and politically further apart. Or I guess a broader way to answer that is and this is again probably a big question, possibly to wrap up on, is the role of dislocation or fragmentation of what appears to be bodies in Nary's work.
I think that in this case, fragmentation, in the case of Baghramian sculptures, fragmentation is not expressed in a bad light, like a bad thing, but it is just kind of a matter of fact. And to make, if we want to see, as I did in my paper, if we want to see this fragmentation as a metaphor, we can clearly see how all the cultural constructions, especially for what concerns female bodies and identities, as just objectified bodies in general. And of course, there are many cultural structures that prevent us to imagine our being, how an all in general. And I think that Baghramian's sculptures just tries to depict this effect, this collateral effect of society, like in a anthropological point, from an anthropological point of view. Obviously, there's also aesthetic plays a big part here. Most of these objects are strongly levigated. There are a direct relationship with the material. So texture is obviously very important also in this case. So yes, I think that fragmentation is just also by social studies being demonstrated as a collateral effect of prejudices, misconceptions about identities and cultures in general, in a negative way, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just what came to mind there was towards the end when I was talking about like a groundlessness of belief, and I think dislocating the body can be a kind of physical ground. You know, when you lose the ground that you perceive the world at, it's you know, in some cases it's gone to places where it's a very bad negative energy, and perhaps by exploring the groundlessness of the body anyway, and the groundlessness of ourselves through the sculpture, it could maybe kind of relay that it doesn't have to be such a negative experience of altering what you know. And so dislocating the body does remove you from that position of the ground, and yeah, opens up this kind of dizziness, unnerving feeling, maybe potentially, but something that we should be comfortable with and can be comfortable with.
Thanks to you both for those very thoughtful answers and also for your contributions today. This has been a wonderful session. I'm going to close things out today, but I would invite everyone, please return tomorrow for our final two papers. And yes, we'll just continue our conversation then. Thanks so much to everybody for joining us, and thanks again to India and Camilla.
Thank you.
Thank you.